Let's take a look at what's below the surface. To the meat of this chapter, we're going to be looking at lots of vocabulary that you need to know. It'll be on the learning curve. You will apply it in your homework assignment for this week. And so let's get started. This video will be a little bit longer because there's a lot of meat, as I said, in the chapter. I like to call it meat, a lot of detailed or heavy content. Okay. We're looking at values and norms, and that's how our cultures operate. The first thing we're looking at is perception. When we look at different cultural groups, we can look at what they value. Not every culture values the same things. Now, when we talk about culture, it could mean different countries. It also could mean just different cultural groups. It doesn't have to be a specific country, but sometimes looking at countries is easier. So here, if you look at the Arab countries, here are some of the things that they value: family, age and seniority, patience and directness. Japan, belonging, group harmony, age, right? Equality, patience, indirectness, hospitality. Oh, there's some similarities here. United States, freedom, independence, self-reliance, time, directness, openness. Do you see anything on our list on the United States over here on the right side of our column compared to Arab and Japan? No, there are no similarities. We value different things. This is why sometimes peace talks are so difficult, because, for example, Israel and Palestine are opposite on everything. So how do you begin negotiations when there's nothing, no common ground on what you value as a society? Okay? So there's a reason why Arab countries and Japan are similar. They are part of what's called a collective culture. The United States is not. They are part of what's called an individualistic culture. This is just a fun video on Japan. If you'd like to travel there, watch this video. It is not required. Again, just go directly to the PowerPoint and you will see, you'll be able to play these videos. Here we have all the main vocabulary you need to know for this chapter and the homework. Well, you do need to know how to be competent communicators with culture, and so there's some vocabulary there. But this is the primary vocabulary you need to know and understand and apply in your homework. So here's just a tip for classes. Any of your classes, always use proper vocabulary that you're learning when you're doing assignments. Always use the vocabulary in your assignments, the papers, whatever it is that you're doing. Always apply vocabulary in all of your classes. Just a study tip or a tip for success in college. If you're looking directly at the main PowerPoint where I have all the slides together, this slide is actually slide 16. And so these slides from 16 to 29 contain all of these vocabulary. Some are several slides. Individualism and collectiveness, for example, are several slides. So these are the key slides you want to be looking at. So the first thing we're looking at is our perspective. A culture's perspective is going to have a me orientation, which is individualistic, or a we orientation, which is a collective culture. I try to give you several slides to help clarify what this means. Collective cultures feel obligation to extended family, to tribes, to the community. It's very group oriented, very interconnected, cooperation, loyalty. You've got to meet your obligations, show respect, right? Individualistic cultures, the primary responsibility is for you, me, myself, and I, immediate family, your rights, your opinions, freedom, choice, self-reliance. That's just a few. On the next few slides, I give you a few more descriptors to help you understand the differences between these countries. So this table is a little bit pixelated, but it gives you a little more detail on what a collective culture is like, the characteristics of a collective culture, and same for an individualistic culture. I have a scale here just to give you a general idea between individualistic and collective cultures. The United States is the most individualistic culture there is. Canada is right there. Australia's high on this individualism. And then you have some, Europe is more individualistic. And then you move to Southeast Asia and you have much more collective cultures. In order to give you a general idea of which countries are individualistic or collective, welcome to my cultural equator. This is something that I made up, so don't go research this. It shouldn't be out there. I drew an equator line here. So the countries that are north of this line, United States, Canada, most of Europe, especially Scandinavian countries, and then Australia, they are individualistic. Okay. If we're talking below this line, we're looking at collective cultures. Mexico, Latin America, South America, the continent of Africa, your Southern European cultures, and Southeast Asia. Very collective. There's always an exception. For example, Israel is really pretty individualistic, where right next door is Palestine and other Arabic countries, which are more collective. So there's going to be an exception to the rule, basically, but this will give you a general idea of figuring out which countries are individualistic or collective. The way these cultures communicate is described by high and low context. So context is the same vocabulary word you used with the communication models: the time, the place, the setting, the situation, the relationships with the people that you have there. All of that applies here. So low context means that this culture relies less on the context. So that would be, the context really is nonverbal. We rely less on the context and more on the verbal. So we are going to use language to express thoughts, feelings, ideas. We're very direct. We're more precise. We're more self-expressive. So your individualistic cultures are low context. They are paired together. High context means we rely more heavily on the nonverbal, more on the context, which means less on language. And it's all because we want to maintain harmony, relationships, that group orientation is more important. And so we want to maintain that. So we are less direct with our verbal expression and our language. We tend to read more between the lines if you're from a collective culture, right? And so collective cultures are high context, okay? So it doesn't mean that they don't use language at all. That's not what it means. They just are not going to be direct. They're not going to tell you no. Okay? So if you were out visiting Japan, you were in a hotel, you go to the concierge desk and ask them to get you tickets to an event. If they can't get you tickets, they will not tell you they couldn't get you tickets. They will speak to you indirectly and say, it's not possible at this time, and you're thinking, well, why? Right? They're not going to be that direct. That is considered rude to them. It is too offensive. They don't want to embarrass you. It is that's extremely important. And so you won't always get clear answers necessarily. I give you a few more details of what high context includes and low context, so you can make sure you understand those concepts. Uncertainty avoidance. This one is tricky, and the vocabulary, I have to say, is confusing. So over here on the right, high uncertainty avoidance means we like to avoid uncertainty. We don't like a lot of risk. We like to know what's going on. Don't give me an agenda and then change it on me, right? Because I need to know what's happening. High uncertainty avoidance is, that might be too risky for me, right? Or for us, okay? It often causes stress for this particular culture. And so they like to be structured and organized, not big risk takers, right? Low uncertainty avoidance means you don't mind a little uncertainty, right? It's okay to have a little risk, a little bit of change, a little bit of stress is okay, right? And so the vocabulary is a little challenging, I have to say. So just look at the descriptions to help you clarify. High uncertainty avoidance means we don't like uncertainty. Low uncertainty avoidance means we don't mind it. Okay. Power distance is the gap between groups, right? Usually between the people or employees and the management or the government, right? And so low power distance would be that employees or the citizens have a say or can communicate with the management or the government. So in a democracy, well, technically we're more of a republic, but in a democracy, the people have a say. We can vote, we can communicate and express our thoughts and feelings and desires. You don't get that in a dictatorship or in communism or socialism. You're not going to find that. I worked at a Fortune 500 company as an employee, and they had a low power distance structure, and they didn't mind. If I wanted to, I actually had access to the president of the company if I wanted to. Not all companies are situated that way. Sometimes you can't. That would be high power distance. Okay, so that just gives you a little bit of idea on differences between high and low power distance in a culture. Cultures also can be looked at in terms of masculine and feminine. It's sometimes referred to as competitive and cooperative. Again, it doesn't mean like then in masculine cultures only the men can say things. It doesn't mean that. It means that they are just placing more value on being assertive, achievement, ambition, and competitiveness. Okay, feminine cultures value more nurturing relationships and quality of life. And quality of life is huge in Scandinavian cultures like Sweden and Norway. So it doesn't mean that there can't be some competition in feminine cultures. It's just this is what they tend to value the most. Okay, so you have to have a little leeway here. It doesn't mean women are silent in masculine cultures. In fact, there's some companies in Japan that are owned by women. So does that mean they're silent? Does it mean they can't compete? No. It's just the culture tends to value these concepts and probably are more male-based. Okay. I have a chart that summarizes a few countries and where they stand on the issue just to help for clarification. You're learning about time orientation as well. They can be divided up into monochronic and polychronic. Monochronic values time. Time is a commodity. We shouldn't waste it. Being late or being early says something. We learned about that in our nonverbal, and so being on time is important in a monochronic culture. Making appointments to get your hair cut by the person you want, monochronic. This is the United States. Polychronic is much more fluid approach to time, and they're more flexible. A good example is Hawaii. I don't know if you've been there or heard of it, but they have something called Hawaiian time. So if you're planning to meet up with friends or a business meeting at 9, and 9:15, 9:30 rolls around, it's all good. Time is fluid. We're flexible. It's not, oh no, you're late, right? So it's much more fluid. If you have ADD, you tend to feel time, which is more polychronic, right? It's now and not now kind of orientation, which is difficult then to work with in a monochronic society. But United States is monochronic. Cultures value talk and silence. This is directly tied into high and low culture. So Western cultures, who are low context, find silence awkward, and language and talking is important. And Asian cultures, which are collective, they would much rather have silence than too much talking. The last part of this chapter is all about your competency and getting more accustomed to dealing with various cultures. not just different countries, but our co-cultures as well. You've probably heard the expression culture shock. It does exist. You may have already experienced it. And so we need to remember that there are differences, and it is surprising and shocking. You need to know ethnocentrism, which is that the belief that your country is better than others. And it's good to be proud of your country. We have the Olympics, and that's what all of it's about. But you still want to see value in the other culture. If you don't see value in the other culture, that's really being ethnocentric. And we're going to say that's a negative. We would like you to be able to be proud of your culture, but also to see value in other cultures and recognizing they come from a different perspective. It's not the same perspective. They don't value the same things. There are some tips on developing your intercultural competence. You can even study intercultural communication at universities. It's fascinating, but just increase your contact with those from other cultures. Welcome differences, tolerate ambiguity, which means if you're telling other people to be tolerant of your cultural group, then you need to be tolerant of theirs as well. Don't have the double standard. I'm finding too many groups that are saying, hey, be tolerant, but they don't tolerate the other people. That's not okay. So we need to acknowledge the differences. Okay. Be open-minded, learn about other cultures. Education is great. If you want to travel, make sure you study in that culture before you travel there. It's not easy. You have to be patient and keep going. So that's how you manage communicating amongst different cultures. You've learned about cultures and co-cultures, and you will want to come back probably to this PowerPoint to use for your homework this week.